Welcome to the 1960s project. Welcome to the 1960s project. The 1960s project brings our voices from the 1960s. In the 1960s project, we've been recalling, remembering, and reflecting on the events that have influenced our lives. Today, we're holding our second conversation across generations. My guests will be sharing the talks she's been having that cover more than 9 generations. Before I introduce today's show, I have 3 asks. There's 3 things I'd like for you to do. One is to like and follow us on Facebook, or What's on Jerome's Mind SM. Also, secondly, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, or What's on Jerome's Mind, and read and comment on our blogs on the web, and go to What's on Jerome's Mind. So like and follow our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and read and comment on our blogs. As I mentioned in the previous show, there's a rule of thumb that generational trauma can exist for at least 5 generations. That means if we start today, we can create a new script for our family and others to break the effect of the trauma we're experiencing today. We can break a curse. We can begin new habits. One way to think about passing on something generationally is to count the number of generations you know firsthand. For me, I knew 3 of 4 of my grandparents. I know both my parents. I know me, that's 3 generations. I know my daughter, that's 5 generations. I know my grandnieces and nephews. And then that takes me down to 6 generations, my great grandnieces and nephews. So there are a lot of ways to think about the intergenerational transfer of information and ideas. And our guest today, Okella Paige Trice, will be talking about the lessons she's learned over 9 generations. So that's what we're going to be doing today in our show. We're going to be holding conversations across 9 generations. Okella?
I hear you.
You hear me? How are you doing today?
I'm fine. How are you, Jerome?
Great. It's good to see you again. And I mentioned your name as Okella Paige Trice, which means, you can't have the sound.
Your sound. Now I hear you now, but you're fading in and out.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I
How's
can.
That?
That's good.
Okay. So I mentioned we get it together here. I mentioned your name as Okella Paige Trice. How are we related?
I'm your older sister. I'm the oldest of the 7 Page children.
Okay. And you 7 Page children, and you're the oldest.
I'm the oldest.
And I'm the 3rd oldest.
You're the 3rd.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I'm the 3rd. So I mentioned 9 before we talk about the 9 generations, let me ask you the question, what is genealogy?
Genealogy is the paper trail study of your family. You start that, talking to grandparents and moving backward. Yeah. Yes. That's keeping a paper trail of your family.
And how did you become a genealogist?
I guess my journey to genealogy stems out of family, visiting I lived with a set of grandparents for
Okay.
But yeah,
there's a little bit of delay here.
Yeah, I'm hearing the delay.
I don't maybe have to pause a minute. Hold on a second. Let me hold on again. I'm going to come in through another device. Okay. And, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, that's better. I had to shift away from my computer for some reason and come in with my iPod, my iPad. So I was asking you first of all, what is genealogy? And I think you answered that, but can you answer the question again?
Sure, that's the paper trail of your family lineage, going back as far as you can go.
And what's an example of a paper trail?
A paper trail is any paper documents. You can have birth certificates, you can have census records, you can have death records, birth records, marriage records, where people, military records, where newspaper articles, you name it, whatever a family generates in terms of notoriety within the family or within the community, all of that paper information builds the story of your family.
Okay. And could oral histories play a role in that as well?
Oral histories as well. So oral histories are very important. So when you do have the opportunity to record folk, is very beneficial. It also is very enlightening for our young people when they can hear the voices of the seniors from the past in their own words, sharing their own stories.
And how did you become a genealogist?
Well, I knew of family stories from my mother, from her siblings, and by the time my daughters reached junior high school, I had determined that they needed to know all of their family, the father's people, my people, and as much information as I could. And so we made a trip to the Mormon family history, Mormon's family history library. And that became my research spot for years.
I hear a lot about the Mormons and genealogy. Why do so many people visit Mormon facilities to research their genealogy?
Because it's a part of their religion to know their past. And so
how would my past show up in their past?
Well, they are the keepers of most of the archived records that the United States has. Yeah, they blended their stuff, or their information, not stuff, their information with the archives of America. And so you can go into their libraries and find, with time, almost anything you want to find. Yeah.
Okay. So you said it became your research spot. How far was the research spot from where you lived?
Oh, it was in Santa Monica. I live in Los Angeles, so it's kind of close to going towards Santa Monica. Yeah, 20-minute ride. I would ride over. It was always very interesting to go over there because they had this huge compound with the statue of Gabriel, and they were always welcoming. They were always very, very helpful. And so I began to see that they knew how to research all ethnicities. I've seen them talk to and help people find their genealogy in Mexico, other parts of the world, and particularly those of us that are of African descent, because historically, until recently, until most of this digitalization that we are experiencing, it was just assumed that we as African Americans could not break through what they call the brick wall. But they would help you amongst the genealogical community. it's interesting how you have common ground with anybody that's in genealogy.
Okay. I remember you called me a few months ago and you were extremely excited. And you said that you had found Shadrach Palmer.
Shadrach Palmer is my greatest at the moment.
Is your
Yes.
your greatest find at the moment?
Yeah, he's the greatest.
Genealogical
Yeah.
find.
Yes.
And so ancestor Shadrach Palmer, okay, since we're going to be talking about a lot of names over the course of the conversation, I'll use less reverential. I'll just use his first name instead of giving him the due respect and referring to him as ancestor Shadrach.
Okay.
I hope he'll forgive us that we'll call him
I'm
Shadrach.
sure call him
Call him
Shadrach.
Shadrach. So who is Shadrach? And
Shadrach.
why was it? Why were you so excited in finding him?
Okay, Shadrach is my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 great grandfather. Your sixth great grand.
On what line? On what line?
On our mother, Susie Palmer Saunders, our mother's line.
So that would be our mother's great grandfather for back.
So that would be Nan. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, 6 for her. It's I'm getting myself confused. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for me. For Nan, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not counting right. Susie, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for Nan. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for me. Her 5th great grandfather, my 7th great grandfather.
Wow. So and when was Shadrach born? When was Shadrach born?
According to about 1792. About 1792.
And what part of the country did you find Shadrach?
Well, I was excited and surprised to find him in Washington, what we now know as Washington, D.C. And I was very excited, but it also helped me to see the area that I knew the Palmers, to the areas where I knew them to have lived. Basically, they had been there all the time. I did not realize that.
Let me add a little historical footnote. The District of Columbia was established in 1790. So when it was established, it was established out of a portion of Maryland and a portion of Virginia. So if you found him in the District of Columbia in 1792 or 1793, being born there, he would have been born in most likely in the Virginia
on the Virginia side
of Washington, D.C.
Correct.
And then the Virginia portion of Washington, D.C. retroceded around 1846 because of the anti-slavery actions in the District of Columbia. But so you found him in Washington, D.C., but it was Washington, D.C. then, but it's not Washington, D.C. today. So that's it.
Right.
Just to keep people
it clear.
Keep it
from being
confused.
Yeah.
So when you found him in Washington, D.C., was he free or enslaved?
Well, the information that surfaced for me came through the Freedmen's Bureau records, through the Smithsonian digitized volunteers. And there was this manumission paperwork that showed him free, and also showed his wife fighting for money that he had saved and had given to, clearly now I understand, as a white slave owner, to hold for him. And his wife fought 2 years to rectify the return of this money to her and to her children.
So Shadrach is born enslaved, or is he born free?
He's born enslaved.
Do you know how he became free?
Well, according to the information in the manumission, he saved his money and he purchased his freedom.
And he purchased his freedom around what year?
That would have been in the 1830s or so, 1830s or so. He purchased his freedom. Mm-hmm.
And we have something up on the screen here, if you can see it. Can you describe that document?
Well, this is a document. Well, let me pull up my copy, and then I can read it better. This is one of the handwritten documents that is housed in the Freedmen's Bureau records. And this is just one of them where Letty, the wife, was going back and forth to the Bureau, filing a complaint about this money that had not been returned to her husband. Yeah.
So
that's what that is.
All right. Okay.
So it's
so it's around 1830 something.
Yes.
That Shadrach purchased his freedom. And then I think part of the story you told me, if I remember correctly, he also purchased his wife's freedom.
Yeah, he purchased her freedom.
And do you know? And her name is what? Shadrach's first name.
Letty Palmer. Unfortunately, we do not have her maiden name. Okay. And just as an aside, when folks are doing genealogy, one of the reasons it becomes difficult to find your women is families don't put their maiden names.
Okay.
So it's important to all young people that do genealogy. It's very important to put names and dates on the back of pictures so you don't lose your women.
Oh, okay. All right. So once the women's take on the husband's name, so to speak, it's hard to trace their history.
It's hard to trace them, exactly.
So we find Shadrach, my seventh great grandfather, our seventh great grandfather, enslaved around 1792, free around 1838. So somewhere in between 1792 and 1838, he saved enough money to purchase his freedom and to purchase his wife's freedom.
And to purchase his wife's freedom, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we know much about him other than those papers that you
mentioned? Just those papers. Just those papers. I had never heard anyone use the name. I mean, other than biblical Shadrach. I did know that amongst the Palmers, there are a lot of biblical names, right on down to our grandmother's brother. He named his children biblical names. And when you get to research in Palmers, you'll find a tremendous investment in the biblical names.
Sounds like a great fictional novel, historical novel to be written there, since we'd have to fill in the characters. So, so Shadrach died when? He died when?
1850 something, I think is what I determined. He died about just before, little between 1850 and 1860.
So Shadrach was able to accumulate property and money, but because of the slave laws and so forth, he really couldn't hold it. So he asked a white slaveholder to hold his money for him. Is that part of the story?
That is the story. That is the story. And as I reread these documents, what I realized now, Jerome, just as of this morning, the first family in these manumissions is a Sarah Pope and a Henry L.G. Pope. And at the very bottom of a long manumission paper, it says that Sarah was a Palmer. So Palmers did own Shadrach Palmer.
Okay. Now, just for people who may not be familiar with all the terminology, what are manumission papers?
Manumission papers are documents that relieve you of a responsibility. In his case, they relieve him of his being a slave. It frees him.
Okay. Okella, is your mic being blocked?
No.
Okay. All right. No, I can hear you. It's just a little, every now and then there's a little crackle. That's all.
Oh, well, you know what? It's hitting. It's hitting up upon my.
Oh, why don't you explain what you're showing us?
Okay, this is the map of Africa that can be purchased from African Ancestry, and the stone represents Nigeria.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that a little later as well. So yeah, your mic must have been rubbing against your
it's rubbing. I'll move it away from my pen. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, all right. So Shadrach dies, and the slaveholders don't give Letty the money. Is that how the story goes?
That's how they don't give Letty the money. They have some story about how part of the money has been lent to another white man. They don't have the money, but Letty was tenacious and she stayed at it until she won, because we have the papers. She won her case and she got that $500 plus the interest.
And what year did she win her case?
She won her case in 1840. It took that long for her to get
1840
it.
or
1840. Yeah, 1840.
Oh, well, let me check on the dates here, because you said the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau would not have come into existence until after the Civil War.
Well, but the Freedmen's, this paperwork ends up in the Freedmen's Bureau archive.
I see.
It wasn't that they collected it. Information, just like all of the archive stuff, can end up anywhere. It can end up with the Smithsonian. It can end up in the other ancestry databases. People have collected and deposited this information in the Freedmen's Bureau archives.
Okay, so Letty, 2 or 3 years after she had her husband's death, was able to file a legal claim.
She filed a legal claim through the Freedmen's Bureau.
So a free Black woman sues a white slaveholder and wins.
And wins. And and not to cut you off, but after reading this morning, not only was it just a white man, these were the people that actually owned him. These were the wife, Sarah, was a Palmer. H.L.G. Pope married her and acquired this wealth. He didn't come with that wealth. She came with that wealth.
So we had a question, because as I say, we're talking these names. So can you retrace your steps and say who owned Shadrach?
The person that owned Shadrach was a Sarah Palmer Pope.
Okay.
And she and her husband sold him to a Mr. and Mrs. Craig.
Okay. And then at the time of, go ahead. Ultimately?
No, and ultimately, then between the legal wranglings between these two families, Shadrach has saved this money and ends up free. Letty files the claim, and Letty then is compensated as she should have based on the amount of money given initially to Sarah and Mr. Pope. And then as the ownership of slavery was transferred to the Craigs.
Okay, so after 1840 something, do we have any other records on Shadrach and Letty?
You don't have any other records of Shadrach, but you have Letty. You have Letty living in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
All
right. So again, this is Washington, D.C. in the 1840s.
Yes.
Because again, Washington, D.C., the Virginia portion of Washington, D.C., retroceded back to Virginia in 1848 or something like that. So
right. Well, the original paperwork I saw on her, she was in Warrington, Virginia.
Warrington, Virginia is just south of Washington, D.C.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, so we have this interesting story about ancestor Shadrach and ancestor Letty. Letty's in Washington, D.C., which is it's also the Virginia portion of Washington, D.C. So when did we lose track of Letty on the paper trail?
Well, we take her back to them and you can follow her forward. I mean, she lives with her children. You find her on census records with her son and her grandson and children. And you start to see these Palmer children. She lives with her children until she dies.
Okay. And so we have Shadrach, who is the seventh one. And we posted a picture earlier of a Jerry Palmer. And where does that Jerry Palmer fit in relationship to Shadrach?
That Jerry Palmer is Shadrach's grandson.
Okay. So we have a picture of Shadrach's grandson. Is that the one
Yeah,
that's on the screen?
that's, and then the picture to the right is the picture of his mother and his sister and his sister's husband.
Okay. So that would be what? Now that's Shadrach is 9 generations. This would be 6 generations back or 5?
You talking about from
you?
Jerry? From me?
From me. From you and
from
me.
us? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. Well, Jerry's back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. He's back 5. And then his father would be 6, and then Shadrach would be 7.
And so, what would be 4 generations back on that line? Who shows up, or what stories show up in that line?
That's then it switches to the women, because Jerry Palmer, the picture we just saw, he married a Berta Jones Palmer.
Okay.
Yeah, Berta Jones. Yeah, the Jones family and the Palmer family all lived in that same area, and those two married, and they birthed our grandmother, Susie Palmer, who became Susie Palmer Saunders.
Are there any other stories that come up? We have the story of Shadrach purchasing his freedom and Letty's freedom. Any other stories that have you uncovered along the way?
We have stories, just stories that help us. At least for me, I was able to see how we have to be diligent about accumulating wealth, because the Palmers, I had heard stories for years about the Palmers losing property for taxes. Then I actually witnessed our grandmother and her husband losing property, and that disturbed me. And so I then contacted cousins and siblings to see if we could save these properties. And in essence, when we talk about reversing a curse, and while we were not able to salvage the properties, we were able to make sure that the property housed another Black family. And so coming forward from that, we know of none of our Palmers and Saunders that have lost property. We have tended to sell the property, or properties left to family members, but we haven't just lost the property to taxes for the state to reap the benefit of.
So for us, you and me, so we're 7 generations out from Shadrach. So our mother, so we have free people in our lineage starting around the 1830s.
Correct.
So we're, in that sense, come 1830, we're not descendants of slaves, but we're descendants of freed people.
And if I can make an aside for anyone that does genealogy, particularly for young people, it's good to know that. And you will find that more often than not when you do your research.
Okay. So the story, go ahead.
We were not all enslaved for the whole 400 years. There were those of us that had shorter terms of slavery.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So you are gathering all this history. Obviously, this is a lot of years since your kids were in junior high school, your daughters were in junior high school. But when you began to amass the history for your daughters, how did you use it, or how did they use it? So they're in junior high school, and they don't know about Shadrach yet, but they know about other lines of the family. How did they use that in junior high school?
Well, I have found that's been a burden on my spirit. My daughters really never used it much, given the educational system here in California. One of the things, they were never given the opportunity to do reports on their own. They were always given the instructions to pick a figure and do a report. I fought for young people to be able to do these reports on on their own families. Since then, though, I have been in schools and I have seen where instructors or teachers do that. I'm a firm advocate if they would include genealogy as part of history. History would become more meaningful and we would all understand this country better. And it gives you a sense of empowerment that no one else can explain when you know your people. When you're sitting in class, because that was an experience I had in junior high school, where we were given the challenge or the task at the end of chapter 9 of some civics book or something to write about your family. And I could, and my peers couldn't. And I was sitting there proudly doing my thing, and you could see my peers cower. So I've only had my experience with that. I've not had the experience with my daughters, nor my granddaughter, but I tell my granddaughter all the time, if you get an opportunity to do a report in school on history, on your family, choose your own. You have enough information to do that. So do your own. Don't just do the standard fare that they come with, because there are too many untold stories within our DNA and within our families.
Let's go back to genealogy for a moment. You mentioned the brick wall. What
Yes.
is the brick wall in genealogy speak?
Well, as I got into genealogy, was attending the Mormon Family History Library, I discovered this brick wall. Back then, for the most part, doing genealogy for descendants of Africans, it was considered that you could not get beyond the 1870. 1870. Yeah, 1870. That you would hit this wall and you would not, if your family didn't have the documentation, you would hit this brick wall and you just could not go any further. But here again, thanks to the Mormon library, they were able to help you learn how to look at deeds and probate records, and then ultimately stuff is more digitized and you have access to other databases now that house all this information, and it's just amazing what will come up. One of the important things to remember about doing genealogy nowadays, with all the various platforms that you can access, some free, some do cost money, the people that put that information in are volunteers. So you never know when you'll go to the database and just what you're looking for will pop up. Okay. This is a volunteer-based effort.
Well, give me two examples. Give me an example of brick wall that you ran into and that you ultimately able to.
Well, it was a brick wall for me for the Palmers until I unearthed, till I was blessed with finding the manumission papers for Shadrach. I was only able to go as far as Jerry Palmer, the picture you just saw, and his mother. Okay. You know, that was as far as I was able to go. And I was looking and looking and looking, and I would go, into the various data, and some of the databases have different information than others. And I found Family Search, and that's where I started to see stuff that was different, that went beyond the brick wall. And then, of course, I say, of course, because I do so appreciate, it was a prayer answered when my niece, your daughter, Gina Page, and her work partner, Rick Kittles, the geneticist, when they formulated African Ancestry database, which takes us back to Africa. So that was the ultimate break of the brick wall, thanks to Gina and Rick with African Ancestry. So now,
go ahead. I was going to say, what are your African ancestries, or what are our African ancestries?
Okay, we trace back to on the maternal Saunders line to the Fulani and the Hausa. The maternal Saunders line, Fulani and Hausa. The fraternal line, Saunders, the Crew. The maternal Page line, the Yoruba. The fraternal Page line, Hausa. and the fraternal Palmer line, Gabon. So we were blessed to get a Palmer cousin a year or two ago to do the DNA test. And so we took Shadrach from Virginia back to Gabon.
So if we follow the Palmer line today, you and I share ancestry with people, genetic ancestry, or we share ancestry with people who are currently living in what we call Gabon today.
What we call Gabon today.
So our genes, some of our genes match the genes of people who are living in Gabon today.
They're living in Gabon.
Right. And it wasn't called Gabon back then.
No, it wasn't called Gabon back then.
We don't know what it was called.
Well, we don't know what it was called.
So those are two examples of brick walls. In reading your blog, and I would highly recommend everybody read the blog. One of the things you mentioned, I've heard genealogists mention this time and time again, they're sitting there with the information and suddenly the information, something starts speaking to them. Can you describe that?
I can. When I first started going to the Mormon library, I had many lines of people where people would say, "Oh, that's not my people. That's not my people." My husband's family was a prime example of that. I found these people. I got all excited. This was before cell phones. The Mormon that particular library had a payphone at the top at the lobby. I always kept change so I could make photocopies, and if I needed to make a phone call, I went racing up to steps to call my mother-in-law to tell her, and she told me, "No, those are not my people." When I went back downstairs, I sat with the books and the papers, and I could just feel and I could hear. They said, "Don't fret. Don't fret. You found us. Don't worry. They'll know in time." And so there is it's an out of body experience. You start to talk. You're sitting there talking to your ancestors, and over time, it took time, but over time, anybody I have researched, it has been proven that I have found their people. So you just have to and I still prefer to be in the library with the books, with the smell of the musk of the books and the feel of the paper. There's something that happens that just connects you through time, and it gives you, and when you're in the library with other people, it gives such a lift of spirit. It also gives a camaraderie with those that are there, because everybody that's doing this wants the other person to be successful with their journey.
You in your blog, you use the term welling up. There was a welling up of your spirit when you engage with these documents. Can you describe what that welling up is?
Unless someone has had a very emotional experience, it is hard. I would wager there are those of us that have seen our elders in church that get emotional and they start to cry, and you see their bodies start to move, and you know that there's something going on that you can't see, but you know that there's something going on. And that's the only way, because it's not something you feel every day. Now, I believe that once you tap into genealogy and you tap into knowing who you are, and you tap into really wanting to understand your family, they're with you. They talk to you all the time.
They meaning your ancestors?
Ancestors will talk.
Do you call them ancestors? You call them spirits, or do you don't name?
I call them ancestors, but I do believe it's their spirits. I do accept that it's their spirits, and I have even had one encounter that I think I disturbed, where my husband's family, they had tintype pictures. I don't know if I should have brought one, but they're very old photographs. And so there's this picture of a great-great-grandmother of his and a great-great-grandfather. And I would just say, oh, only to be able to speak to them. Only if they would. And that night, something came to the foot of the bed and I got excited. I wasn't afraid. I got excited and it disappeared. But I do believe they will guide you. They will communicate with you. I have had other experiences just here in my home where our home is broken into. And I've been told, don't go. And I didn't go. And ultimately was discovered that somebody was in the house. I've had several experiences like that. But I attribute that to what a medical doctor told me years ago when it comes to allergies. I thought I didn't have symptoms. And he said, you do have symptoms, young lady. You've got to learn to be in tune with your body. And then I branched out into the wellness community. And there people said, you know your body, understand your body, and don't discount this information that comes in a form that you're not used to seeing. Embrace it. You will live a safer life. You will live a healthier life, and you will lead a blessed life. Just let them guide you, if you will.
So you're going to have to go on a genealogical spiritual journey. So you're going to take us.
Yeah. Well, you know, go ahead.
No,
I was going to say, one year, Mom and I were down in Virginia, and I was in the archives of a library and had to stop because my uncle got sick. But then when you're down there with all of that old stuff, it does become a spiritual journey. It does become a spiritual journey.
Well, you in your blog also, you mentioned you have some messages. You highlight 3 messages. We could start in 1792 and talk about individual years, individual decades, and individual people. The first message was that you would want to share is from looking back over this 9 generations plus, 9 generation being 7 back and 2 forward. The 2 forward would be your daughters, that would be, and then your granddaughter. So the 2 forward would be those generations.
Right.
But the one theme is freedom and justice. How did you identify that theme as being something you saw in your genealogical and spiritual search?
Well, with Shadrach, Letty clearly wanted the justice for her husband, and she fought for it. She made her way to the Freedmen's Bureau. And if folks don't know what that was established after the Civil War. And the Freedmen's Bureau was established to help slaves transition to freedom. And through the Freedoms Bureau, they were able to get medical care. They were able to get education, anything they needed. I mean, that was eventually disbanded. But for her to be so tenacious that she would make her way to this place where she could get legal assistance and fight to get that money. For Shadrach, it was just the tenacity, the drive that he did not want to remain a slave. And I don't know what kind of work he did, but he amassed $500, which if it had been caught on him, he'd have been lashed and whipped. He couldn't save the money on his own. He had to give it to his slave owner or somebody else to hold, because it was illegal back then for them to even be housing that kind of cash on their bodies. So
what's the message to the younger generation today? We hear a lot of people talk about all the challenges we face. But what's the message of Shadrach and Letty to the younger generation today?
Well, as I see it for the younger generation, there again, get to know who you are and get to know your people and appreciate the tenacity they had to fight for a better life for themselves and for their children. And know that even in 2021, you can do the same. There are ways for you to go into the environment, the multicultural, interracial environments, and you can still be you, but you can stand out and fight for you and your folk. This is what they did.
Okay. Right. Susie asked an economic question: how much would $500 be worth today? But we'll deal with that. I can't do that in my head.
No, I can't do that. Never thought to write that one down. Yeah.
Yeah, but Felicia's on the call, and she might be able to whip up her computer and plug in some inflation rates and tell us what $500 is worth today. The second message you have is one about wealth accumulation.
Yeah, wealth accumulation.
What did you learn about wealth accumulation looking over 7 generations? And then what is your message to the subsequent generations that are to come?
Well, the lessons I learned from the grandparents and from my parents is have your own, own your own if you can. And know how to care for your property, know how to help each other to maintain property. So, we have to work as a unit. So it's important we live in a world where people think, oh, I can do it by myself, or Frank Sinatra, I'm going to do it my way. But it's important to know who you are and know where you fit in this family structure and ultimately the global structure, so that you're not only benefiting yourself, but you can also be a benefit to others.
Right. And we don't have time now, but along the Saunders line of our family, we're talking about the Palmer line, but there's the Saunders line where there's a story about businesses being built and institutions being established.
Right.
Maybe we'll say bring you back to talk about the Saunders line.
Yeah.
We'll stick with the Palmer's line today.
But they're also, Jerome, you're going to go to education now?
Yeah, I was going to go to the third message was about education and trade.
And so the Palmers and trade. So Shadrach's son, Jerry Palmer Sr., he was a blacksmith there in Washington, D.C. So he had his own business, had his own property, had his own business. And anybody that has learned anything about blacksmiths were very important in a community. I forget just what they were as important as a barber. Barbers used to be the doctors, and so your blacksmiths were very important. And so these people had to know how to read and write, or at least they learned to read and write. They learned to communicate. And like, we don't know what Letty's education was, but clearly she knew a thing or two because she stayed with the Freedmen's Bureau and was able to obtain what she felt was rightfully hers and hers. So she had, but then coming forward, Shadrach had a granddaughter that was a seamstress. Family lore is that she made clothes there in the White House. Many of them were ministers. So as ministers, many of them, they would be reading the Bible, which is the premier way most folks that were enslaved learned to read. It was through the Bible. So I saw the importance of education. Then our grandmother, Susie Palmer Saunders, through the Freedmen's Bureau, she went to school and through what was known as a normal school. And that was where they taught high school age girls to be teachers. That school
that would be your grandmother, or your
my grandmother, and their area in Bluefield. So the Freedmen's Bureau established what is today the historically Black college known as Bluefield State. It was Bluefield State for years. It was Bluefield State Teachers College, and then it changed from Bluefield Institute, Bluefield State, Bluefield State. So it had different formations of the name. So and then most of my mother's siblings went to Bluefield State, a year or two there. 3 of her brothers played football. I went back there from Philadelphia, and that's where I continued to bond and start to feel the spirits of the family. So that whole business about education and seeing how the older folks, my grandmother, I didn't realize until recently, she she read, there was a woman, Helen Burroughs, that was very much active in the women's suffrage. And Helen's family, the Burroughs family and the Palmer's family were all in Orange, Virginia at one time. So my grandmother knew about her, read her books, read her plays. And she had several plays.
When I was reading your blog, I said Nanny Helen Burroughs and my grandmother used to hang out together. So wow, that's a trip.
She was about 4 years older, so our grandmother saw her as a mentor. And then plays were a staple in the church. And then by the time my daughters got to junior high school, that's what I was doing in the church. I was putting on full-fledged first-class plays in the church, brought the theater to the church.
And that's another historical footnote. We'll have to come back to how Bluefield State was the first historically Black college and university to become predominantly white. That's another story to talk about.
Historically, predominantly white. Historically, you wonder how do they get the money when they're all. And there's a whole lot of backstory with all of that as well.
Yeah, there's a backstory on that. So we have the message of freedom and justice. You want to recap what that message is?
So freedom and justice.
What's the message?
Knowing who you are, feeling comfortable with you are, and always fighting for what is right for yours and what you feel is yours, but you do it in a way that's respectful and honorable. Yeah.
And then how would you summarize message 2 around wealth accumulation?
Wealth accumulation is, when you can, you save your money, because the Freedmen's Bureau was a place where you could save money as well. And we have records that show Palmers were saving money. Our father, with his business, he was mentored by men who explained to him the value of family working for you. So he started Christmas savings funds. And we had these Christmas savings funds every year until each of us became a senior in high school. We graduated. And then we were responsible for learning how to save our own money. And our mother taught us never to save. I can't say I did so well with that, but we were never to save. So knowing how to,
but let me just say, she taught us not to charge.
Not to charge. I'm sorry. Not to charge. Yeah, we were taught to save. And matter of fact, even through the public school in Philadelphia, savings was a weekly transaction. You'd buy your tokens and you'd save through the Pennsylvania Savings Fund Society. So we have been immersed in having your own, understand your own, taking care of your own, having your own money, because then you can be in charge of your life and other folks can't come in and tell you what to do all the time.
And then a recap of message 3 regarding education and the importance of education and trade.
Well, the importance of education and trade. I used to hear the old folks say, you get a good education, because that's the one thing the white man can't beat or take out of you. You get it, let it be a part of your very fiber. So when you have it, and my journey, when you learn things, you don't always know when you're going to use them. But rest assured, if the Lord has allowed you to learn something, the time will come when you will see exactly when you need it. But all of that is building and getting to know who you are and all the gifts and talents that come with you. The other thing is to always keep in mind, too, young people, it's very easy to want to be like somebody else or think somebody else is smarter than you or someone is better than you. But always remember, we're all individually and wonderfully made. Even twins don't have the same thumbprints. So God is vested in each of us if we open up and receive the talents, the education, and skills, and you will find that you will be doing things that you never dreamed of as you get older. And you will do them well because it's what you're supposed to be doing.
Would it be fair to say that these aren't messages from our ancestors, or can we frame this is what our ancestors expect?
And they expect it because they're, again, what I used to hear and see. That's what they would tell you. This is what, we're not asking you to do it. This is what, and a part of the way the family unit worked and gathered there was a reverence for your elders. And so it was understood that, I mean, I never questioned whether or not I was going to college. Matter of fact, that college was not on my radar. But then I was told you are going because you are the oldest and a girl. So, and I'm glad I did. You know, I'm very glad I did.
So we can end our conversation, which has been, so this is again, your conversation starting in the United States across 9 generations.
Right.
Right. So we start with Shadrach Palmer, who was enslaved, brought his freedom, brought his wife's freedom, and created a family tradition that led to us today. So we're 7 generations away, and then we have children. And then in your case, one of my nieces has a kid, a child, right. A daughter. So we had, so this is why you're calling it a conversation across 9 generations.
Right. And I have those conversations with the nieces and the nephews and the conversations with, and we have conversations with cousins, you know, as we resume. They always appreciate whatever gleaning surfaces or reminder. And you build this strong bond for who you are. And you know you have family around the country. We now know we have family in Gabon. We have family there in Liberia. We have, you know, we have family on the continent, which is great to know.
Yeah, and going back to the bond, not to jump around too much, you mentioned that Jerry Palmer Jr. was a blacksmith or Senior was a blacksmith?
Senior was his blacksmith. He was.
And we know that Gabon is known for its ironworks.
It's ironworks, exactly. And we have a sister, when I shared that with her, she said one day she found herself looking at her furniture, and she has all this wrought iron furniture. And it's a part of who we are.
Okay.
Now there are people that will poo-poo it, but I'm an advocate for letting the spirit lead you.
And so is that a message you want to leave for the next generation?
For the next generation, know yourself. And once you can know who you are, then let your ancestors help you on your journey. They're not here physically, but they're there if you allow yourself to tap into them.
Thank you, Okella Paige Trice, for your conversations across 9 generations. Also, I invite the people who are watching this now and later to read the blogs and provide comments. You'll also be able to view this on YouTube and Facebook later. And if you're interested in sharing any of your thoughts, your journeys, your reflections, what conversations are you having across generations? What message do you have for your younger people? Join us, contact us. We'd be glad to hear from you. So again, this is the Voices from the 1960s. We're having conversations across generations. Okella, again, thank you very much. And thank everyone for listening. Good night.
Thank you, Jerome.